I woke up that Tuesday morning with butterflies dancing in my stomach, the kind that only come on truly special days. The Texas sun was already streaming through our bedroom windows, casting golden rectangles across the hardwood floors Marcus and I had picked out together just 6 months earlier. Today marked 3 years since we said I do, and I had spent the entire week planning what I thought would be the perfect anniversary celebration. Our new hot tub was finally installed. The steaks were marinating, and I had even splurged on that expensive bottle of wine we had been saving for a special occasion. Little did I know that by midnight I would be packing my bags and walking away from everything I thought I wanted. Before I tell you how my marriage fell apart in one evening, let me know where you are watching from and hit that like button if you have ever felt completely blindsided by someone you trusted. And subscribe, because what happened next will show you exactly why I never looked back. Marcus and I had what most people would call a fairy tale romance. We met during our senior year at the University of Austin, both of us cramming for finals in the library when he accidentally knocked over my coffee all over my marketing textbooks. He was so embarrassed, insisting on buying me new books and about 10 replacement coffees until I finally agreed to go on a real date with him. That was 4.5 years ago. And 3 years ago, we had the wedding of our dreams in a small church outside Dallas, where my grandmother had gotten married decades before. At 28, I was working as a marketing coordinator for a tech startup downtown, while Marcus, 30 years old, had landed his dream job as a software engineer for a major firm. We had just bought our first house together in a quiet suburb about 30 minutes from the city, complete with a beautiful backyard that Marcus had convinced me we needed for entertaining. He was the kind of man who still opened car doors for me, who remembered to pick up my favorite lavender ice cream when I had a bad day at work, and who never failed to tell me I was beautiful, even when I woke up with mascara smudged under my eyes. Marcus had this gentle way about him that drew people in. He was naturally funny without being mean-spirited, intelligent, without being condescending, and had this genuine kindness that made everyone from our elderly neighbor Mrs. Patterson to my skeptical father absolutely adore him. In 3 years of marriage, we had never had a real fight, just minor disagreements about whose turn it was to take out the trash, or whether we should save money for a vacation or put it toward the house. He treated me like a queen, always asking my opinion on decisions big and small, and I honestly thought I had won the husband lottery. But there was one aspect of Marcus that had always made me slightly uncomfortable, though I had never been able to put my finger on exactly why. Every few months, his childhood friends from Houston would decide to visit, and it was like a switch flipped in my husband. The gentle, respectful man I married would suddenly start talking louder, using language he never used around me, and acting like the opinions and feelings of his wife were somehow less important than keeping his buddies happy. The group consisted of 4 men Marcus had grown up with since elementary school. There was Jake, the unofficial leader of the pack, who at 32 had never been married and seemed to take pride in that fact. He had this aggressive energy and a way of talking about women that made my skin crawl, always referring to girlfriends as balls and chains, and making crude jokes that Marcus would never find funny under normal circumstances. Then there was Brad, who had just gone through a nasty divorce and seemed to harbor resentment toward all women as a result, constantly making bitter comments about how marriage ruins men and how wives are just expensive roommates who nag too much. Tony was perhaps the most immature of the group, despite being 31 years old. He had never had a relationship that lasted longer than a few months, and spent most of his time playing video games and living in an apartment that looked like a college dorm room. He treated serious conversations about relationships like they were jokes, and seemed to think that growing up and settling down was somehow giving up on life. Finally, there was Kevin, who was actually married, but spent every visit to our house complaining about his wife Sarah, talking about her like she was some sort of burden he had to endure, rather than the woman he had chosen to spend his life with. What bothered me most was not necessarily their individual personalities, though I found them all pretty unpleasant to be around, but the way Marcus transformed when they were in our home. The man who normally asked me how my day was and listened intently to my answer would suddenly interrupt me mid-sentence to laugh at one of Jake's inappropriate stories. the husband who usually insisted we make decisions together, would agree to plans without even consulting me, shrugging off my concerns with a dismissive wave and a comment about how I was being too uptight. I had mentioned this pattern to Marcus a few times over the years, trying to approach it gently because I knew these friendships meant a lot to him. They had all been through high school together, played on the same baseball team, and had stayed in touch through college and into their careers. I understood that old friendships were important, and I never wanted to be the wife who made her husband choose between his spouse and his friends. But when I brought up how uncomfortable their visits made me feel, Marcus always had the same response. They are just old friends. They do not mean anything by it. And I was reading too much into their behavior. For our anniversary, I had been planning something special for weeks. I took the afternoon off work to visit our favorite butcher shop and pick out 2 perfect ribeye steaks, the expensive ones we usually saved for special occasions. I bought a bottle of wine that cost more than I typically spent on groceries for the week, the same brand we had shared on our wedding night. I strung lights around our back patio, created a playlist of all the songs that meant something to our relationship, and even made a reservation at the salon to get my hair styled in the way Marcus had once mentioned he loved. I had bought a new red dress specifically for the evening, something elegant, but not too formal since we were staying home. Marcus had promised me it would be just the two of us, a romantic evening to celebrate 3 years of marriage and talk about our hopes for the future. I had been dropping hints for months about maybe renewing our vows on our 5th anniversary, and Marcus had been particularly sweet lately, making comments about how lucky he was to have found me, and how he wanted to spend the rest of his life making me happy. I was honestly expecting the evening might end with some sort of romantic surprise, maybe even a discussion about starting a family. Everything started going wrong around 5 o'clock in the evening. I was in the kitchen seasoning the steaks and putting the finishing touches on a salad that had taken me the better part of an hour to prepare when I heard the unmistakable sound of multiple car doors slamming in our driveway. The noise was followed by loud voices and obnoxious laughter that I recognized immediately, and my heart sank into my stomach like a stone dropping into water. Marcus appeared in the kitchen doorway looking sheepish and uncomfortable, running his hand through his hair the way he always did when he was nervous. So, Angela, the guys decided to stop by for a little bit. They wanted to congratulate us on our anniversary. His voice had that apologetic tone that I had heard before, the one that meant he was about to ask me to be understanding about something I definitely did not want to understand. Before I could even respond, Jake, Brad, Tony, and Kevin came barreling through our front door, like they owned the place, each of them carrying coolers that I knew were packed with beer, and Jake had a massive Bluetooth speaker under his arm that was already blasting some sort of rock music that was completely inappropriate for a romantic anniversary dinner. They were loud and boisterous, taking up space in our carefully decorated living room, like they were settling in for a long evening rather than stopping by for a quick congratulations. "Marcus, my man," Jake bellowed, slapping my husband on the back so hard that Marcus actually stumbled forward a step. "We are here to celebrate with our boy. 3 years of married life. Can you believe this guy actually made it this long?" The comment was followed by raucous laughter from the other 3, and I watched as Marcus joined in with a chuckle that sounded nothing like his normal laugh. I stood in the kitchen doorway, still holding the salad tongs, and tried to paste a smile on my face as I greeted them politely. "Hi, everyone. It is nice to see you again." My voice sounded strained even to my own ears, but I was determined to be gracious, even though my carefully planned romantic evening was clearly going out the window. Brad looked me up and down in my new red dress and made some comment about how I was all dressed up for a Tuesday night, which the others found hilarious for reasons I could not understand. Tony was already setting up the speaker and connecting his phone, completely ignoring the soft jazz playlist I had spent time curating for our romantic dinner. Within minutes, our peaceful home had been transformed into what felt like a fraternity house, complete with loud music, beer cans being cracked open, and conversations that involved a lot of yelling and cursing. What hurt most was watching Marcus immediately slip into his old role as one of the guys. The man who had spent the morning telling me how beautiful I looked and how excited he was for our special evening suddenly introduced me to his friends as simply, "This is Angela," not "This is my wife," or "This is the love of my life," or any of the ways he normally talked about me when we met new people. It was like I had been demoted from wife to some woman who happened to live in the same house. When I quietly mentioned that the steaks I had prepared were probably only enough for 2 people, and suggested that maybe we should order some pizzas so everyone would have enough to eat, Marcus waved off my concern with a dismissive hand gesture. "Just relax, babe. It is fine. We will figure something out." The casual way he dismissed my practical concern, combined with the fact that he called me babe instead of honey like he usually did, felt like a small slap across the face. The guys immediately launched into stories from their high school days, talking about girls they had dated, parties they had attended, and adventures they had shared, all while completely ignoring my presence in the conversation. When I tried to contribute something relevant or ask a question about their stories, one of them would talk right over me or change the subject entirely. It was like I had become invisible in my own home. Jake kept making these comments about how Marcus was tied down now and had lost his freedom, punctuated with elbow nudges and knowing looks between the group. Instead of defending our marriage or expressing how happy he was, Marcus would just laugh along and sometimes even agree with statements that were essentially insults to our relationship. "Yeah, the single life definitely had its perks," he said at one point, which made my cheeks burn with embarrassment and hurt. As the evening wore on and they continued drinking, I found myself retreating more and more into the background, cleaning up their beer cans and trying to salvage what I could of our anniversary dinner. The beautiful steaks ended up being shared among 6 people instead of 2, which meant everyone got portions that were barely satisfying, and the expensive wine I had been saving was consumed by people who were already too drunk to appreciate it. After dinner, Jake suggested they all get in the hot tub, and I felt my stomach drop, because I knew this was where the evening was going to take an even worse turn. I was not comfortable getting in a hot tub with Marcus's friends, especially not in just a bikini, especially not when they had been drinking and making inappropriate comments all evening. But when I hesitated, Marcus looked at me with this expression that was half pleading and half irritated. "Come on, honey. It is our anniversary. Let us have some fun," he said, but his tone suggested that my reluctance was somehow unreasonable and that I was being difficult for not wanting to party with his friends on what was supposed to be our romantic evening together. Once we were all in the hot tub, the atmosphere became even more uncomfortable. Jake suggested playing Truth or Dare, which seemed like a terrible idea, given how much everyone had been drinking, but Marcus went along with it enthusiastically. The questions quickly became personal and inappropriate, focusing on details about our marriage that should have been private between Marcus and me. Instead of shutting down the invasive questions, Marcus actually seemed to enjoy being the center of attention and answering things that made me squirm with discomfort. Brad started making comments about my appearance that were completely inappropriate, talking about my body in ways that made me feel exposed and objectified. When I shot Marcus a look that clearly communicated how uncomfortable I was, he either did not notice or chose to ignore my discomfort entirely. The man who normally would have immediately shut down anyone who spoke disrespectfully about his wife was not only allowing it, but seemed to be enjoying the crude male bonding that was happening at my expense. What happened next will be burned into my memory forever, as the moment my marriage officially ended, even though the divorce papers would not be signed for another 3 months. Tony, emboldened by the group dynamic, and the alcohol, looked directly at Marcus and issued what he called a dare, but what felt more like a challenge to his masculinity. "I dare you to prove that you still got game," Tony said with a sloppy grin. "Ditch your wife for the night and come hang with the boys like the old days. Show us you are still the same Marcus who used to be fun." The other 3 immediately started cheering and encouraging this suggestion, talking over each other about how real men do not let their wives control them and how Marcus needed to show who was really in charge in our relationship. I watched in horror as Marcus actually started considering this ridiculous proposition. The man who had promised me a romantic anniversary evening was now looking back and forth between his drunk friends and his humiliated wife, and I could see him wavering under the pressure of their expectations. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds, Marcus turned to me with an expression I had never seen before. "Why don't you go inside and let us guys have some time together?" The words came out of his mouth like he was asking me to pass the salt casual and thoughtless, as if he had not just suggested that I leave my own backyard on my own anniversary so he could have a boys' night with friends who had crashed our celebration. Jake immediately jumped on this suggestion with enthusiasm that made me feel sick to my stomach. "Yeah, Angela, this is boys' night now. We need some quality time with our buddy here." The way he said my name with this condescending tone, like he was talking to a child who needed to be dismissed so the adults could have important conversations, made my blood boil with anger and hurt. I looked at Marcus, waiting for him to realize what he had just said, and take it back, waiting for him to remember that today was our anniversary and that these people had already completely ruined our special evening. Instead, he looked annoyed that I had not immediately complied with his request. "Come on, do not be such a drag. Just go inside and we will celebrate later." The words hit me like a physical blow. My husband had just called me a drag for wanting to spend our anniversary together, for expecting to be treated with respect in my own home, for not immediately disappearing, so he could have fun with friends who clearly had no respect for me or our marriage. The group erupted in laughter and approval, treating this moment like it was some sort of victory for Marcus, rather than a complete betrayal of his wife. Kevin, apparently inspired by Marcus's newfound backbone, decided to add his own commentary. "See, that is how you handle a clingy wife. You gotta show them who is boss in the relationship." His words were slurred from alcohol, but the message was crystal clear, and the fact that Marcus did not immediately tell Kevin to shut his mouth and apologize spoke volumes about where my husband's loyalties actually lay. I climbed out of the hot tub with as much dignity as I could muster, my hands shaking from anger and hurt and disbelief that this was actually happening. "Marcus, today is our anniversary," I said, trying one last time to appeal to whatever part of him still remembered that he was married to me and that today was supposed to be about celebrating our relationship. But Marcus was too caught up in the approval of his friends and probably too drunk to think clearly about what he was doing to our marriage. "We can celebrate later. Stop being so dramatic about everything." The dismissive way he said it, like my feelings about our anniversary were some sort of unreasonable overreaction, was the final straw that broke whatever remained of my respect for him as a husband. I walked into the house with tears streaming down my face, feeling more humiliated and disrespected than I had ever felt in my entire life. From the kitchen window, I could hear the group continuing to talk about me, making jokes about how I was probably inside pouting, and how Marcus had finally learned to put me in my place. The worst part was hearing Marcus laugh along with these comments, instead of defending me or expressing any regret for how badly he had just treated his wife. Jake's voice carried clearly through the open windows as he gave Marcus advice about marriage. "Dude, you need to show her who is the boss in this relationship. Women need to know their place, and if you let them walk all over you, they will never respect you." Instead of being disgusted by this outdated and disrespectful attitude toward women, Marcus actually seemed to be taking the advice seriously. "Yeah, maybe you guys are right," I heard my husband say, and those words cut deeper than anything else that had happened that evening. The man I married was agreeing with his friends that his wife needed to be put in her place, that my expectation of being treated with respect on our anniversary was somehow unreasonable and controlling. I pulled out my phone and sent Marcus a text message. "Please come inside. We need to talk about what just happened." I was still hoping that once he was away from his friends, he would realize how badly he had messed up and would want to apologize and try to salvage our anniversary. Instead, his reply came back almost immediately, "Later, busy with the boys right now." That response made it clear that even when directly asked to prioritize his marriage, Marcus was choosing his friends over his wife. I could hear them making plans to leave the hot tub and go to some bar downtown, completely abandoning any pretense that this was a quick anniversary congratulations visit. Tony actually shouted toward the house, "Angela, do not wait up for us," which caused another round of laughter from the group. The most devastating part was that Marcus did not tell Tony to shut up or show any indication that he disagreed with the idea of leaving me alone on our anniversary to go party with his friends. He was actively participating in plans that involved abandoning his wife on one of the most important days of our year together, and he seemed to think this was perfectly acceptable behavior for a married man. Sitting alone in our bedroom, I finally allowed myself to really process what had just happened and what it meant for our marriage. This was not the first time Marcus had chosen his friends over me when they were around, but it was the most blatant and hurtful example of a pattern that I had been trying to ignore for 3 years. I realized that Marcus was fundamentally weak when it came to standing up for what was right, especially when it meant going against peer pressure from his childhood friends. I started thinking about all the times I had made excuses for his behavior, all the times I had convinced myself that he just needed to find the right balance between his friendships and our marriage. But tonight had shown me that when forced to choose between respecting his wife and impressing his friends, Marcus would choose his friends every single time. That was not the kind of man I wanted to spend the rest of my life with, and it was definitely not the kind of father I wanted for my future children. I sat on our bed staring at the suitcase I had pulled from the closet and tried to wrap my mind around the fact that I was actually packing to leave my husband on our third wedding anniversary. 6 hours earlier, I had been the happiest woman in Texas, convinced I was married to the most wonderful man in the world. Now I was folding clothes and trying to figure out how many of my belongings I could fit in one bag, because I could not bear to spend another night in a house where I was treated like a burden instead of a beloved wife. I called my best friend Sarah, who had been my maid of honor, and had always been honest with me about everything, even when the truth was hard to hear. "Sarah, I need somewhere to stay tonight, and probably for a while longer. Marcus and I are done." My voice was steadier than I expected it to be, which told me that somewhere deep down, I had been preparing for this moment longer than I wanted to admit. Sarah did not ask a lot of questions over the phone, just told me she would make up her guest room and that I should come over whenever I was ready. "I will leave the front door unlocked so you do not have to knock and wake up the whole house," she said, because it was already past 11 o'clock, and I still had no idea when Marcus and his friends would return from their boys' night out. I wrote a note explaining my decision, trying to be clear about why I was leaving without being cruel or angry in my words. "Marcus, I cannot be married to someone who allows his friends to disrespect me and who thinks that humiliating his wife is acceptable behavior. You chose them over me tonight, and that choice showed me everything I need to know about what our marriage really means to you. I will be staying at Sarah's while I figure out what comes next. Angela." Around midnight, I heard the group returning to our house, their voices even louder and more obnoxious than they had been earlier in the evening. Marcus was clearly very drunk based on how he was slurring his words and stumbling around, but he seemed to be in great spirits after his evening of male bonding at the expense of his marriage. "Hey babe, where are you? The guys just left, and now we can finally celebrate," he called out as he made his way through the house looking for me. There was something so tone-deaf about his assumption that I would still be interested in celebrating our anniversary after he had spent the entire evening treating me like an inconvenience and then abandoned me to go drinking with his friends. When Marcus found me in the living room with my packed suitcase beside me on the couch, his expression shifted from drunken happiness to confusion to what looked like the beginning of panic. "What is with the suitcase, Angela? Are you going somewhere for work or something?" He was still so clueless that he could not imagine his behavior earlier that evening might have consequences. I looked at my husband, this man I had loved so completely just hours earlier, and felt nothing but disappointment and clarity about what I needed to do. "Yes, Marcus, I am leaving you. Our marriage is over." I kept my voice calm and matter-of-fact, because I had already done all my crying, and now it was time to act on the decision I had made. Marcus actually started laughing, like I had made some sort of joke that he found amusing. Come on, Angela. Do not be ridiculous. It was just a guy's night. You are seriously going to leave me over something so stupid. The fact that he thought my feelings about our anniversary were stupid, and that he could not see how disrespectful his behavior had been confirmed that I was making the right choice. You told your wife to go inside on our anniversary so you could have boys' time with friends who spent the entire evening disrespecting me. I explained, trying one last time to help him understand what he had done wrong. You let them mock me, you participated in making fun of me, and then you abandoned our anniversary celebration to go drinking with them. Marcus waved his hand dismissively, like he was brushing away my concerns about his behavior. I was just trying to keep the peace with my friends. You know how important those relationships are to me. Even now, hours later, and faced with the prospect of losing his wife Marcus, was still prioritizing his friendships over our marriage and making excuses for treating me badly. Your friends do not respect me because you do not respect me when they are around, I said, and I watched as this statement landed like a physical blow. Every time they visit, you become a different person, someone who thinks it is acceptable to treat his wife like she does not matter. For the first time that evening, Marcus seemed to realize that I was actually serious about leaving. The drunken confusion on his face was replaced by genuine panic as he started to understand that his behavior might have real consequences for our marriage. Angela, please let us talk about this tomorrow, when we are both thinking more clearly. I love you. Do not leave over something like this. I had been trying to talk to Marcus about this pattern of behavior for years, bringing up my concerns gently and hoping he would recognize the problem and make changes on his own. But every time I mentioned how his friends treated me, or how his behavior changed when they were around, he would dismiss my feelings and tell me I was being too sensitive, or reading too much into innocent joking around. You let them convince you that treating your wife badly is somehow funny or acceptable. I continued because he needed to understand that this was not about one evening, but about a fundamental problem with how he viewed our marriage. A husband's job is to protect his wife, not to participate in humiliating her for the entertainment of his friends. Marcus dropped to his knees beside the couch, grabbing my hands and looking at me with desperation that would have moved me just 12 hours earlier, but now felt too little too late. I love you, Angela. Please do not leave over something so stupid. I will make it up to you, I promise. The fact that he was still calling this situation stupid showed me that he did not understand what he had done wrong and probably never would. When my Uber arrived, Marcus followed me to the front door, still begging me to reconsider and trying to convince me that I was overreacting to what he kept calling a harmless evening with old friends. Angela, they are my childhood friends. I cannot just cut them off completely. Even in this moment, he was still missing the point entirely. I am not asking you to cut them off, I said, as I picked up my suitcase and prepared to walk out of our house for the last time. I am asking you to respect your wife when they are around, but apparently that is too much to expect from you. Marcus kept insisting that his friends were just joking around and that I was taking their behavior too seriously, right up until the moment I got in the car and left him standing alone in our driveway. During the 2 weeks I stayed with Sarah, Marcus called and texted constantly, but his messages showed that he still did not truly understand what he had done wrong or why I had left. He kept apologizing for the evening not going as planned and promising that next time he would make sure his friends behaved better, but he never acknowledged that the real problem was his own behavior and his failure to stand up for our marriage when it mattered most. My family and friends were incredibly supportive of my decision to leave, especially after I told them the details of what had happened on our anniversary. My mother, who had always adored Marcus, was shocked and hurt on my behalf. A real man protects his wife's dignity, she told me. He never should have allowed his friends to treat you that way, and he certainly should not have participated in disrespecting you. When it became clear that Marcus was not willing to acknowledge his role in destroying our marriage or commit to serious changes in his behavior, I filed for divorce. he begged me to try couples therapy, but his version of therapy was asking a counselor to explain to me why I should be more understanding of his need to maintain friendships, rather than acknowledging that he needed to learn how to be a husband who protects and honors his wife. During our divorce proceedings, something interesting happened to Marcus and his childhood friendships that he had been so desperate to preserve. When his life started falling apart due to real consequences like divorce lawyers and splitting assets, and figuring out where to live his buddies, Jake, Brad, Tony, and Kevin were nowhere to be found. None of them offered him a place to stay. None of them helped him move his belongings, and none of them seemed to have time for hanging out when Marcus needed actual support, instead of just someone to party with. 6 months after our divorce was finalized, Marcus reached out to me with what seemed like a genuine apology, finally acknowledging that he had failed me as a husband, and that his behavior on our anniversary was inexcusable. He had apparently realized that the friends he had prioritized over our marriage were fair-weather companions who disappeared the moment his life got difficult, while he had lost the one person who had truly loved him and supported him through everything. But by then, it was far too late for apologies or promises to change. I had already started building a new life for myself, one where I was valued and respected every single day, not just when it was convenient or when there was nobody around to impress. I had learned that a man who cannot stand up for his wife in front of his friends will never truly protect her when life gets really challenging. The experience taught me the importance of recognizing red flags in relationships, especially patterns of behavior that only emerge under certain circumstances. Marcus was a wonderful husband, 90% of the time, but the 10% of the time when his friends were around revealed his true character and priorities. I learned that consistency in how someone treats you is far more important than grand gestures during the good times. I eventually met someone new, a man named David, who treats me with respect and kindness regardless of who else is around. When his friends visit, he introduces me proudly as his wife and makes sure I feel included and valued in every conversation. He has never once made me feel like I need to compete with other relationships for his attention or respect, because he understands that a marriage means choosing your partner every single day, not just when it is easy. As for Marcus, I heard through mutual friends that he eventually learned from his mistakes, but only after losing everything that really mattered to him. He is apparently much more selective about his friendships now, and has worked on developing the backbone he should have had during our marriage. I am glad he grew as a person, but I am also grateful that I did not waste years of my life waiting for him to figure out how to be the husband I deserved. Marriage requires two people who choose each other consistently, who protect each other's dignity, and who never allow outside influences to come between them and their commitment to one another. Sometimes walking away from someone you love is the most powerful thing you can do, not just for your own self-respect, but to show them that their choices have consequences. I never looked back, because I knew that I deserved better than a man who thought humiliating his wife was an acceptable price to pay for the approval of friends who never really cared about him anyway. Looking back now, I realize that leaving Marcus was not about punishing him for one terrible evening, but about refusing to accept a lifetime of being treated like I mattered less than everyone else in his world. I chose myself, my dignity, and my future happiness over a marriage that would have slowly eroded my self-worth year after year. That choice changed the entire trajectory of my life in the best possible way. Have you ever been in a situation where someone you trusted completely let you down when you needed them most? Let me know in the comments below how you handled it and whether you think I made the right choice in leaving my marriage. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about love, relationships, and finding the strength to choose yourself. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that they deserve better than settling for disrespect. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that you are worthy of love that honors and protects you every single day, not just when nobody else is watching.